After two videos summing up Britain's prehistory, in this video I will be summing up Britain's historical period, which covers almost 2,000 years. This is, however, considerably shorter than prehistory. The Roman period is the first of Britain's historical periods. It lasted for nearly 400 years. The most famous structure surviving is, of course, Hadrian's Wall. The Romans also left the baths at Bath in Somerset. They called Bath Aquasules. Probably the most famous legacy left by the Romans is, of course, their road network. At the time of the Industrial Revolution, when they started building turnpike roads, the Roman roads were still the best roads left in Britain, and it was really only with the construction of the motorway network that you can say the Roman road system was to a certain extent surpassed. But even then, it's still in use, even if it's now only local traffic using Roman roads. We consider the ends to the Roman periods to be 410 AD, because this is when the Romans withdrew the legions from Britain owing to trouble close to home. The Roman Empire had by now split in two, with the Western Roman Empire based at Rome and the Eastern Roman Empire based at Constantinople. The Western Roman Empire had collapsed by the end of the 5th century. The Eastern Roman Empire endured for another 1,000 years. After the Romans, you then enter the early Middle Ages. The early Middle Ages used to be referred to as the Dark Ages because there is a shortage of written material for historians to look at. After the Roman legions left, gradually the Roman society broke down. There was a wave of immigration from what is now northern Germany, often referred to as the Anglo-Saxons, but we now are not sure exactly how much of this was new immigration and how much of it was the existing Celtic populations being assimilated. You did end up with parts of Britain which even to this day are more Celtic, such as down the far southwest of England, Wales and Scotland, and even the far northwest of England, and obviously Ireland itself is also Celtic. There is also a bit of a Celtic culture in the Isle of Man. You had initially various tribes, some of which have left their names in counties. The county of Essex is after the East Saxons. The county of Sussex is after the South Saxons. Although it's not a county, you did have Wessex, the king's brother. Prince Edward is the Earl of Wessex. Gradually, these tribes had formed into kingdoms, and Wessex was one of those kingdoms. In fact, it would be the last one standing, because starting in the late 8th century and continuing until the 11th century, you had the Viking Age. Probably the most famous Anglo-Saxon site in the United Kingdom is Sutton Hoo, where the famous helmet illustrated here comes from. This was a ship burial in a burial mound for an Anglo-Saxon king. No remains were found because the soil is so acidic that the remains had disappeared. There was, of course, famously a King Viceroy of East Anglia, who is famous because he was the one who brought Christianity back to that part of the country. Christianity had been adopted by the Romans, but apart from the Celtic areas, disappeared in the 1st century or so after the collapse of Roman rule, but nevertheless from the 6th century onwards it started to be brought back. St. Augustine, the first Archbishop of Canterbury, was the missionary who started Christianizing the Anglo-Saxons. The Viking Age started towards the end of the 8th century and lasted until the middle of the 11th century. Scotland, Ireland, the Isle of Man and Wales were colonised by Norwegian Vikings, and then later Danish Vikings into England. There is a debate, were they raiders or traders? There was a certain amount of both. Their empire stretched from Istanbul to what is now Newfoundland in Canada. There is a legacy obviously left behind. The Parliament on the Isle of Man is a Viking Parliament until Well into the second millennium, Orkney, Shetland and the Western Isles were in fact part of Norway before being handed over to Scotland. The Vikings have affected the language that is spoken in Britain and also the sites of a number of towns, particularly in Ireland, such as Dublin. The reason why the Kingdom of Wessex remained the only Anglo-Saxon kingdom standing is because all the others have been taken over by the Vikings, but then there was the agreement for an area known as the Danelaw, which remained under Viking rule. This was agreed between the Vikings and Alfred the Great, but his successors then proceeded to conquer this area. Ironically, therefore, the Vikings helped in the creation of a unified English kingdom. Between 1016 and 1042, a series of Danish kings, most famously Canute, ruled England, and you did have temporary unification between Norway, Denmark, and England. But the House of Godwin, to which Alfred the Great had belonged, was restored to Edward the Confessor, and following the death of Edward the Confessor in 1066, you then had an accession crisis. So that is Roman and early medieval Britain. In the subsequent videos, I will cover medieval Britain, the Tudors and Stuarts, the Georgians, the Victorians, and the 20th century. Please like, share, and subscribe.